Hello, I'm Frances from Homestead, and I would like to show you a traditional Thanksgiving dish that my mother always made. It's something that I've carried through for my family, and I know some of my siblings have done the same. However, I've put a modern twist on it. Now, my brother Ray has helped develop this as well. It's called tomato aspic. Now, not a lot of people know of this unless you're from the South. And I grew up in California, so it was a very uncommon thing to have amongst my friends because in California, unless their family was from the South, they'd never heard of it. But it's basically a tomato jello. And it is delicious. Now, if you like tomatoes with cottage cheese, you will love tomato aspic. The traditional way to do it, there's some different variations, but a lot of them had different vegetables like onions and celery, or I had a sister-in-law that always made it with crab meat. Myself and some of my siblings, as well as my children, we didn't like it chunky. We liked it clear and smooth. I have seen it where they cook the onions and celery in tomato juice and then strain it off. But I didn't want to waste the vegetables. I love the vegetables in it. So this is one thing that my brother came up with. He thought, with the onions and celery and the tomatoes, it smelled just like V8. And so, voila, we came up with V8 to make tomato aspic with. And it has been a wonder. Now, myself, when I make my tomato sauce, I always make it with onions and garlic and bell pepper, and I love to use the tomato sauce that I make and just thin it out a little bit. But for today, I'm going to use the V8. And here on the homestead, and probably most homesteads, we have an abundance of canned tomato products. And this is one way to use the tomato juice or the whole tomatoes blended up, or tomato sauce that we make, and it makes a delicious side dish for our Thanksgiving dinner. Now, to start with, we need just some unflavored gelatin. Here we go. It's just unflavored gelatin, a little packet of unflavored gelatin. And one of these is usually good for 1 to 2 cups. And I'm going to use 2 of these so that we get a nice solid form. And we put it in a 1/2 cup of cold water. Now, this cold water was also swished in the jar so it's got a little bit of tomato in it, but it's mostly just cold water. I'm just going to make sure all of that is dissolved. It's a 1/2 cup, and so I'm just dissolving those 2 packets of unflavored gelatin in a 1/2 cup of cold liquid. And then I'm going to set that aside and let that set up. Then I'm going to take 2 cups of V8 or tomato juice or my tomato sauce, and I put that in a pot, and I'm going to bring it to a boil. Now, with the tomato juice, or V8, I'm going to add 2 small bay leaves. Now, if you have 1 large, it's fine, but I have 2 small ones. And I'm just going to bring that to a boil. And then I'm going to cook it just for maybe 5-10 minutes so that the bay leaf can incorporate its flavors into the tomato aspic. Now, traditionally, tomato aspic is made in a mold. You've seen those beautiful copper molds or wreath type of molds. That's another variation I've done. For me, with my family, I just put it in a small casserole dish. Now, not all of my kids love tomato aspic, and so I would just make a small one because I loved it and I always wanted to have it with my Thanksgiving dinner. And so I always made a small one, and that way those of us who wanted it could enjoy it, but I didn't have too much left over. But I put it in a casserole dish, and then I can layer it with some cottage cheese on top. My mother always put it in a Jell-O wreath mold, and then would put the cottage cheese in the center after it was turned upside down and dumped out on a plate. And that was really fun. But I find a casserole dish is something I have more on hand. I put the lid on to help it come to a boil quicker. And then once it comes to a boil, I'll reduce the heat and just let it simmer with just a low boil. Okay, we have a nice little boil here going, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the temperature down to low and set the timer for 10 minutes. Now, tomato juice is something that growing up we always had on hand because in Northern California there were lots of commercial tomato fields, and my father worked out with the growers so that our family would be able to come in and glean the tomatoes after the pickers had come through for the commercial picking. And we would get a whole pickup load, just full of containers, a whole pickup bed full of containers with tomatoes. And my mother would do gallons and gallons of tomato juice. And so we had lots of tomato juice to work with. Often the base or stock for our stews would be tomato juice. It was just something that was very prevalent, and of course tomato soup was a staple in our home. Often rather than having tea or hot chocolate in the mornings, we would drink some hot tomato juice to warm us up in the mornings. And to this day I still love to have a mug of tomato juice. So now you can see that the Jell-O is set up really nicely, and we'll just scoop that into our casserole dish. And we're just going to pour the hot liquid over it. Now we just stir it to dissolve the gelatin throughout all the liquid. Now we're going to let it set for at least 4 hours or overnight in the refrigerator. And by the magic of editing, here it is. Now we have a beautiful tomato aspic. It's solid. I like to give it at least 4 hours, but overnight is preferred to give it a good set. And then I just take some cottage cheese and I layer it on top. And then after I get the cottage cheese on top, I can just cut a beautiful look at that. Isn't that beautiful? It is so yummy. Like I said, if you like tomatoes and cottage cheese, you will love tomato aspic. It is so yummy. Thank you for joining me on this nostalgic tomato aspic adventure. I'm so grateful for you. Until we meet again.